Hi everyone, it's Andy from Hobby Headquarters. Well, over the last months and years, I'd even say, I've had so many people always ask me about different terminology about the parts of a tank. So today, I thought I would do a quick informative video about what the names are on certain parts of the tank, some of the history involved, where those names came from, the meanings, all that kind of stuff, and even talk a little bit about what an actual tank is. Last time when Lucas C on his channel, he built up an AFV, an armored fighting vehicle, and he was calling it a tank, and people were correcting him because it's technically not a tank. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that too. So this is just going to be a quick, short little video just about parts of the tank. So let's get started on it. Before we start breaking down the parts of the tank, what I thought I would do is show you some armored fighting vehicles, some AFVs, that are actually not tanks by classification. And all tanks are armored fighting vehicles, or AFVs, but not all AFVs are tanks. Now we have 4 different types of vehicle right here that we'll show you, that many of the average person would look at it and say this is a tank. And in the true sense, it's not a tank. These are actually all specific type of weapons and the way they were designed. The first one we have here is a Sturmgeschütz. This is from World War II. This is actually an assault gun. Now, it has the caterpillar tracks on the bottom and an armored hull and everything else just like a regular tank would be, but it's not a tank. It doesn't have a true turret like a tank would, and its type of roll was completely different. Now this right here, this is an M40, and this is a mechanized artillery piece. This came out at the very, very end of World War II and saw action into Korea. And this too is not a tank because it's an artillery piece, still on a tank chassis, but not a true tank. Now we have this little vehicle right here. This is a turreted vehicle, but it too is not a tank because it is a wheeled vehicle, doesn't have the caterpillar tracks, and this is classified as an armored car. Now the final vehicle we're going to look at is the closest thing to a true quote-unquote tank. And this is a World War II M10 American tank destroyer. Now the little history about that is, in World War II, the initial tanks that saw combat, like the Sherman, were primarily infantry support vehicles. And they were actually instructed not to take on other tanks in tank battles. That was the job of the tank destroyer. The tank destroyer was a faster vehicle, had lighter armor, has a turret, but you can see the turret is open on top, had a more powerful gun than the Sherman did. And this was all based on early war type stuff. As the war progressed, they found that it was necessary to start putting larger guns on the actual tank itself. And it was, just because you said you're not supposed to be fighting with other tanks, but if you run into a tank, you're going to probably end up fighting with them. So this is the closest thing to a real tank. Now we're going to pull over to these 2 vehicles, and most of you will recognize these right away. These are true tanks. They were designed with offensive and defensive capabilities. This is a Panzer IV. This is a Tiger, both German World War II vehicles. You can see they have the caterpillar tracks on the bottom, they're armored structures, and they have a turret on it. Now, the classification for tank has changed throughout the years because normally you'd say, well, like a turreted vehicle would be a tank, but in early World War I, the vehicles that were coming out like the Mark IV male and female did not have turrets on them. They had sponson guns on there, but they are still classified as tanks. And now we will bring in this vehicle right here. And this is the M1A1 Abrams main battle tank. And it is, in all definition, the truest sense, what a real tank is as modern times. It is fully tracked, as you can see right here. It has a turret that can swing 360 degrees. It's got a main gun for taking out vehicles at a long distance. Plus, it is full of machine guns for protecting the actual vehicle in a close range. So a tank today is just that, a tracked vehicle with a turret that's basically a frontline type attack vehicle. Okay, so now that we have a tank in front of us, let's talk about some of the parts on it. First thing we're going to talk about is this front plate right here, and this is called the glacis plate. And the word glacis is actually a French engineering term from medieval times, and glacis basically meant a sloped hill leading up to a fortification, which describes this basically. It's a minor slope that goes right up to the big fortification, being the gun. And since we're talking about this portion of the tank, the whole bottom portion of the tank through the center here is called the hull of the tank. And then the sides here, not counting the suspension or the tracks or anything, just the sides themselves are called the sponsons. Now, right off the top, you might be wondering why it's called a hull and sponsons, which those are primarily ship terms. And that all comes from the fact that in 1915, the British were thinking about doing some type of armored vehicle. They wanted to have Caterpillar tracks so it could move over all kinds of terrain. They wanted it to be armored. But the British Army had vehicles similar to that they were using for towing artillery pieces, but did not have the desire to create an armored vehicle in the true sense like a tank. So this was all initially turned over to the Royal Navy. And the Royal Navy started this off. They wanted to basically build land ships. So with a land ship, you had Navy builders, and so they use all the same terms as you would on a regular ship. So we have the hull of the vehicle, the sponsons, the turret up on top, which is a turret is obviously something you'll see inside a warship as well. And even the word tank, because it was a secret project at the time, the British Admiralty came up with everything. They wanted to call it a water tank because they wanted to disguise the fact, because the older tanks back then looked just like that, like they were designed to carry water. And eventually the water part got dropped and the word tank was just left behind. We are now going to continue with the lower portion of the tank, and we're going to look at the wheels and suspension and things like that on the bottom. Now, obviously, this is a German tank, the Tiger, and we'll just go over quickly what the parts are here. Most of them are very self-explanatory. We have down here on the bottom, these are the road wheels. Now, the road wheels on a German tank such as this, you notice that there is no suspension sticking out on it, and that is because there is a suspension arm that comes up that attaches the vehicle, and then inside the vehicle there is a long rod of steel, sprung steel, that is mated into the other side of the vehicle, which you can kind of see down the center of those torsion bars on the inside there, and they're locked in on the other side. So when the vehicle would go over a bump, it would push up on this road wheel, and it basically twists the steel inside there. So we're talking a big giant chunk of metal inside there twisting, and that's why it's going to want to spring it right back into position. Now, on the front of the vehicle right here, this is the drive mechanism of the tank tracks, and this is your drive sprocket. It has the teeth. Now, in this particular vehicle, it's in the front, but it is not uncommon, especially in modern day vehicles, to have the drive sprocket in the back. And one of the reasons now that the drive sprockets are back there is because that's usually where the engine is. So in this particular vehicle, they had to have the engine back here, but they had to have a long drive train that went to a transmission up front, then drove the drive sprocket up here as well. Now we're taking a look at another type of suspension, and this is the M40 that I told you technically is not a tank. It's an artillery piece, or mechanized artillery piece, but this is the basic lower chassis of most tanks in World War II. And this is a bogie system right here. And a bogie, all that was a framework that would hold wheels. And you can see all the suspension is right in through here. So when one side would go up, it would compress the shock here as well as the spring inside here as well. And just another different type of suspension they would come out with. You have our drive sprocket once again, the idler wheel, which the idler wheel is really good for tightening because this is the adjustable part of it. So if your tracks were getting a little too loose, you could tighten up on your idler wheel. And some vehicles have these, some don't. And these are the return rollers. And that is just to keep the track going across the top, without, drooping too far into any of these other little areas down here. And finally, I've taken the turret off the Tiger here to kind of show you, this is the engine deck of the vehicle, and that's of course self-explanatory. This is the deck that sits on top of the engine compartment. We have our radiators right in through underneath here. We have the engine access port, and then of course we have our exhaust over here. Now, most tanks do have the engine in the rear of the vehicle, and if you, like I was telling you earlier, they would have to have the transmission that would go up in the front and a long drive shaft that would power that. There are a few exceptions exceptions, like the Israeli Merkava tank. The Merkavas all have the engine in the front of the vehicle, and that has a benefit too, because when you're going into combat, having that extra engine in front of you really can add a lot of extra armor support that if the vehicle is going to get hit, to protect the crew inside. But this tank right here had quite a bit of frontal armor on it to begin with. Now we can look at the top of the vehicle here, or as we call it, the turret. Now, the turret is an Italian term meaning little tower, which technically that's what it is. It's a little tower shooting up from the actual vehicle. And on top of the turret, we have the cupola right in through here. Now, the cupola is another architectural term, and cupola basically meant it was a little dome on top of a turret or a roof or anything, in which that basically works out to. It's a little domed type shape that you could look out, you know, for this is the commander's cupola right here, that he could see everything with the periscopes all around it, every part that was going around the vehicle. Now we're going to look at the front right here, and this huge piece of armor right here. And this is the Mantlet. And in World War II, for the most part, they were real big, thick, heavy pieces of armor that were attached to the gun. And that had its pros and cons. It really helped protect the front of the tank right here, but you had to have a lot of extra support because that was a lot of weight on the gun itself. And Mantlet was a French term, medieval term, that Mantlet was basically a wicker shield that was kind of curved in shape for the most part, and it was used by troops to go into combat that would protect against arrows or, you know, projectiles. So that's basically what the Mantlet does right here. Adds a lot of extra frontal protection to anyone inside the turret. Okay, now we're going to look at the main gun on the tank, and on this particular one, this is the Tiger. So this has got an 88mm L56, which I'll explain to you guys what that means in a minute. But as we go down the length of the barrel, we come to the end down here, or the muzzle brake. And what we'll do is we'll kind of show you that a little bit closer. You'll see some like little fins on the edge right here. Basically what the muzzle brake will do is as the round is fired, it's fired inside the vehicle, inside the breech, the propellant gases are expanding at a tremendous rate of speed, and as they do, they push the round or projectile down the length of the barrel. And as it's doing that, though, it's also pushing on the back of the gun too, so it wants the barrel of the gun to blow back inside the turret. Now, all guns have some type of compensation inside that will either be springs or shocks or something to absorb that, to push the gun back into its normal position. But what the muzzle brake does is it diverts some of the propellant gas and prevents the kickback. So as the projectile passes through the muzzle brake, some of the gases will get blown out the side here and push on this little fin, pushing forward on the gun. It doesn't completely stop recoil, obviously, but it can reduce the recoil, depending on the gun, anywhere from 10 to 30%. So as you can see, they can get away with a lot less springs and things inside, or pistons inside there, that would take up more room inside the turret. And real fast too, I'd also thought I would explain to you how German armored guns work in the way that they're written out. Now, this is obviously a Tiger, and it has an 88mm L56 gun on it. And the L56 just refers to the length of the barrel interior. And the L56 means that it's 56 calibers long, and the caliber is the diameter of the round. So if you're looking down the gun barrel, you know, you have the circle right here. So the inside diameter in through there is 88 millimeters. So you would take 88 millimeters times, kind of draw it out for you guys, times the 56, and you come up with 4,928 millimeters, so just under 5 meters or about 16 feet long. So it's basically a way of expressing the length of the gun barrel. Now, the longer the gun barrel, and of course the more propellant that you put behind the round, the more velocity the projectile will be leaving the barrel with. So on a King Tiger, which also has the 88mm gun, but it has an L71, the propellant charge is double the amount of a Tiger, and kind of broke it down like this to kind of give you guys an example. So they're both using an 88mm actual projectile coming out the front, but there's double the amount of powder, and 5 more feet of barrel on here. So when you look at it, and this is just using an armor-piercing round, at 2,000 meters, the Tiger could penetrate up to 110 millimeters of armor. The King Tiger could penetrate 153 millimeters of armor, and the muzzle velocity of the Tiger 1 was 3,100 feet a second when it left the barrel. The King Tiger was at 3,700 feet per second when it left the barrel. So that breaks down what the L followed by the number on a German cannon means. And the last little bit of history trivia, we'll call it, is obviously this is a gun barrel right here. And have you ever wondered why they called it the barrel of a gun? And that is because early European guns were made out of strips of wrought iron that went down the length of the barrel, and they were welded together into a hollow cylinder with strengthening rings that went all the way around the barrel. That was to keep it from exploding as they fired it. And it was built basically just like a wooden barrel would be, with the strips and then pieces holding it all together. And that is why it's called a gun barrel. Well, there you go, guys. I hope you guys got a little information / trivia out of this video. I know there's going to be a lot of you out there that already know a lot about all this stuff, but trust me, there's lots and lots of people in the world who don't know about it. And I hope this provided just a little taste into armor and letting them know what some of the terminology is. So if you enjoyed this video, I would hope that you would go ahead and click that subscribe button down in the corner down there. And I want to thank you guys as always for watching, and please stay tuned because we have many more videos coming.